Welcome to the Eta Kappa Nu podcast, Career Conversations. My name is Amy Jones, and I'm a member of the Eta Kappa Nu Young Alumni Team, a group of young engineers and computer scientists navigating our own careers and sharing our conversations about work, life, family, and having it all. I'll be the host of today's episode. Our guest today is Jacquelyn Nagel. Dr. Jacquelyn K. Nagel is an engineer, academic, and consultant. At James Madison University, she is a professor in the Department of Engineering. She earned her Ph.D. in mechanical engineering from Oregon State University and her master's and bachelor's in manufacturing engineering and electrical engineering, respectively, from Missouri University of Science and Technology. As a multidiscipline engineer, her diverse areas of expertise are bio-inspired design, or BID, mechatronic systems, and manufacturing automation. As a student, she worked at Kimberly-Clark, Motoman, and Intel, and gained experience in the areas of industrial automation, manufacturing, and sensors. As a professor, she has grown an international reputation for BID process and pedagogy research and has given invited talks, webinars, lectures to IEEE, INCOSE, NASA, and at universities in Canada, France, and here in the US. As a consultant, she leads practicing engineers and organizations through the process of taking inspiration from nature to solve problems. Jacquelyn, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start off with learning a little bit more about you. Could you tell me a little bit about your background and how you decided that engineering was the field for you?
Of course. I'm one of those kids who, growing up, that I love taking things apart and mostly putting them back together, but definitely it was more fun to take them apart and just see what's inside. And what I found is usually the mechanical components, I can figure out how they fit together, how they work, but other things were more curious to me. So like the circuit boards in something that I was taking apart had all these little squares and canister looking things and stuff that was soldered on that I had no idea what it was or how it worked. And I was very curious about this. And once I got into high school, I did technical drawing because that was like the most technical thing I could do in my high school. So I did drafting. I actually started on pencil and paper. So it's like really big drafting boards, the special lead, the special erasers, I had all the stuff. And it was my drafting teacher who told me about engineering because I had no idea what this was. And he just explained it in such a simple way that it really hooked me. And he's like, Jacquelyn, engineers solve problems. Like, oh, like puzzles? He said, yeah. Like, oh, I love doing that. And then I had to figure out, well, there's all these different types of engineering. Which one do I study? And that's when I kind of fell back on that prior experience of curiosity around circuit boards and how do electrical things work? Because you can't see it, right? You can't hold it. And that's how I focused. I went into electrical engineering because I needed to know more about how these things worked.
I love that so much because I had a very similar experience going into electrical engineering where it felt like almost a secret club of people who had this knowledge, and I wanted so badly to understand it. So, in your background, you have both a lot of industry experience, but you've ended up in a career in academia. How did that decision go for you? Was it a difficult choice?
Oh, yes, it really was. And when I was working on my master's, that's when I met my soon to be husband at that time. And so that kind of altered my trajectory. And so when I went into grad school, I only thought I was going to get a master's and then I was going to go off and work, do something with robotics and manufacturing. Because as you mentioned in my biography, I have a lot of experience with automation in manufacturing. So I really want to do that. But then what happened was while I was working on my master's in manufacturing engineering, that was the first time I was really exposed to doing research and being trusted as a researcher to answer a question, create a plan, follow through. And that was really fun. I had never done that before, and I really, really enjoyed it. And so, um, my next step, getting a PhD, it wasn't like I'm going to do this 100%. I really had to think through that and decide, do I want to go to the next level? Because it's going to close some doors. It'll open some new ones, but it will actually close some doors too. So I had to really think about that. And ultimately, I decided I'm going to do it. And um, so then I had to find a research group to join. And me being very curious, that's pretty much the theme for today, right? Curiosity. And I wanted to know more about how sensors work, how they're designed, who gets to make the decisions around sensors. Because my master's work, I had worked on automating a metal-based 3D printing process, so laser metal deposition. And I wanted to know more about the sensor side of things. And so that's when, I found a research group that would allow me to study that. And that's also when I first learned about bioinspired design. I had no idea this thing even existed. And the research advisor that I talked to, he's like, well, I have this money related to biomimicry and design. And I said, well, I want to study sensors. Can I study the design of sensors and use biomimicry in that? And he said, sure. And I said, okay, then I'm in. It was a pretty simple conversation. And so then that led me to the path of getting my PhD. And I guess you could say just what really, really has always stuck with me about being in academia is this idea of freedom to study whatever is exciting to me and develop research questions and just investigate it further. And that has been the thing that's really kept me in academia. And of course, like exciting other people about the things that I'm excited about and seeing students grow. I love interacting with alumni. Um, but yeah, that ability to just follow what excites me and really dive in deeper and be able to do that every day is really exciting.
Well, thank you so much for sharing. And for those who may not be familiar, Jacquelyn put on a TED Talk, which we'll link to in the show notes. And just like she does for her students, I found that really inspiring. And Jacquelyn, I wanted to talk to you today about curiosity as a whole. So you've mentioned it a couple of times in our conversation as a real driving force behind career choices, but really seems like it's something that's really core to who you are as a person. So, could you talk a little bit? How do you define curiosity?
Absolutely, I love this question because I do think it's different for different people. For me, it's really this drive or this desire to know more, to to make connections across different types of information, and um, continuously revise my mental models. So if you think about it, like if you could visualize in your mind like a concept map or a mind map, so they have, central bubble and then these branches of more bubbles and it keeps branching out and things are connected or not connected. So that's like my mental model. And so as I'm learning and asking new questions and these bubbles are constantly linking or unlinking or growing. And for me it also connects to a growth mindset, being able to accept failure, learn from what didn't go well, and then use that as an opportunity to keep learning more. And kind of a fun piece of history about myself. I was so excited to get a smartphone, when it was uh, kind of the new technology on the market, because I could have Google or, being able to search the web in my pocket because I have so many questions and I just wanted a smartphone so I could access the internet at any time, ask my questions. Because, yeah, curiosity is a big factor in my life.
I love that so much. I think sometimes we forget a little bit how lucky we are to have instant access to all of this information. Um, it's something that I think is really going to be kind of generation defining
Hmm.
for us. So, Jacquelyn, what do you think is the role of curiosity in the life of an engineer? Do you think it changes from the time when you're a student into being a professional, whether that's industry or academic?
Ooh, I think the role of curiosity in the life of an engineer, yeah, at all stages of the career is a big one. Because as engineers, we need to continuously keep learning because technology is changing. The way that we can solve problems continues to change. And then curiosity can also just help solve those problems. We need to think innovatively, creatively, constructively, you name it. Having that sense of curiosity can help explore the design space to find those interesting solutions to the problems that we're encountering. And again, just keep learning because things are changing so rapidly.
I've found that to be so true in my experience. One thing that I realized earlier this year was that my job did not even exist when I graduated. The component that I'm working on didn't exist. The concept of what I'm doing today in my day job doesn't exist. And so the curiosity and the drive that so many people invested in my company to really push the boundaries and create this entirely new area of work, I think is something that a lot of us get to experience, hopefully over the course of our careers.
Oh, it's pretty amazing. You're a trailblazer.
I think other people trailblazed for me, but I'm very glad to take advantage of it. So, Jacquelyn, you've mentioned that curiosity was something that was really impactful for you, very early in your life. It's also really important, obviously, to us as engineers in our careers. Do you think that curiosity is innate, or is it something that we can develop?
I absolutely think that it's something that can be developed. And I think there's two critical skills that people can develop that can lead to stronger curiosity. One of those is observation. So just taking in the information that's around you. So these are your senses, right? What do you see? What are you hearing? What are you feeling? Hopefully, you're not tasting and smelling and hearing things, but you never know. But definitely sight and sound, like taking in those observations and using this as data to help think about what's going on in the situation. Um, one of my colleagues at JMU, he has a background in manufacturing, and we have traded stories from the manufacturing floor. And he has this phenomenal story of this technician who just knew the machine so well that could hear when the machine wasn't working in its most efficient form. And I completely agree with that from my own experience working in diaper manufacturing. Like you can hear the difference between a machine that's working well and not working well. So just using that power of observation is one way. And I think the other skill that can be developed that can lead to greater curiosity is asking questions. So anybody with small children knows there are a lot of questions that can be asked.
So many.
And yes, very. And so like taking a cue from, we'll say, novice learners, people who don't know that much, and just asking questions and not being embarrassed by asking questions. I know there are some people who are like, get annoyed, when someone asks too many questions. But I think there's somewhat of an art form to asking questions because they need to be open-ended enough that there's not an assumption built in. They need to not be yes/no questions to really get at interesting insights. And so I think people can hone their question asking ability that can lead them to more curious, or that can build their skill in curiosity.
I think that's really profound. The idea of asking a question being a skill. I've, in my experience, I've always found that asking questions can take a little bit of bravery too. Because in asking a question, you're acknowledging that there's a gap, that there's something that you don't understand, or that in some ways you're challenging the status quo. And
Yeah.
so I think that that is something that we have to really cultivate and try to keep as a fresh practice for us over the course in our careers, especially as you become, a professor or as you become a senior level person in your job. It's really can be intimidating to say that you don't know something.
Yes, yes. I think asking questions can show vulnerability, but still, it's not about the person, right? If you're trying to solve a problem, it's about the problem. And then the process getting to the solution may look different for different people, but it's about the solution, right? So,
I really appreciate that because that is, I think, a really great trick for people who may be afraid to ask questions. Remember that the focus isn't on you as a person, it's on the problem that you're trying to solve.
absolutely.
So, next, I want to transition a little bit into talking a little bit more about bio inspired design because I think it's such a great example of so many of the things that we're talking about here. So, as I mentioned earlier, you had a fantastic TED talk that we will link to in the show notes about bio inspired design. So, can you talk a little bit about how you first made that connection between the natural world and human made objects?
Absolutely. I touched on this a little bit before. Um, oh, and also, thank you for watching my TED Talk. I appreciate that. And I'm glad you found some value in it. That was definitely a very challenging and rewarding experience at the same time. But the to answer your question about the connection, as I was explaining earlier about going into my PhD work, I had no idea what bio-inspired design was until Dr. Stone, who ended up being my research advisor, mentioned it. It's like he told me I have research money to connect these two data points, biomimicry and engineering design. I need somebody who can do that. And that's when I said, well, I'll do that through sensor design. And he said, sure. So um, when he first mentioned biomimicry, I said, I don't know what that is. And he said, well, go take some time, look at it. And that's when, I started digging a little deeper into it and I realized it's this interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, insert your favorite word there, field that just brings together so many pieces of information. And it, as I mentioned before, my description of curiosity, that ability of making connections is really critical for bio-inspired design because there's things that happen in nature and taking that organism or material or structure from nature and putting it in the engineered system is not biomimicry or bio-inspired design. That's just bioutilization. Or having the biological system make, say, the material for the engineer. That's not bio-inspired design either. That would be bio-assisted. And then there's the whole realm of it just looks like something in nature. So a wind turbine that kind of looks like a tree. It has no other properties of the tree other than it just kind of looks like one. And that's more biophilia. So there's a lot of tangentially related areas to bio-inspired design, but bio-inspired design is really about learning the biology. That's a very critical piece. You have to learn something about the biology because, as I say in the TED Talk, there are these things you can see, and those are, the forms, the materials, the structure, the surface patterns, the architecture of the system. And then there's the things you can't see. That's the functionality, the processes it executes, some patterns or system level interconnections. Right? So you need both of these types of pieces to really get to that inspired design. Otherwise, it's just copying. That's when you get like a prosthetic limb or artificial something, artificial X, and then or one of those other tangentially related things that I mentioned.
I thought the example in your TED Talk specifically about your students and how they transitioned around their frog related designs was really a great example of this.
Mm-hmm.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference between kind of their first iteration and their final iteration?
Absolutely. Yes, their first designs were very focused on what does the frog look like. So those observable physical characteristics. So it has legs, it hops, things like this. And so that's what a lot of the original designs looked like or did. So basically just making the mechanical frog, which again, not bio-inspired design. It's not inspired. It's more imitation. And that's something that when I teach this topic, I really try to hone in and get the students to realize there's a spectrum. Imitation, that's more like what that direct copying that I mentioned versus inspiration, which is really learning about the biology and understanding how it connects to ways that we can solve problems in engineering. And so by helping them understand that you can break down a biological system into these different physical and non-physical characteristics and pull them apart and put them together and make these connections over into engineering, their designs really started to move across that spectrum and evolve into more inspired designs. And then now they were looking at, well, what's the functionality of the tendon in the leg that creates the hopping? So kind of putting the hopping and the fact that it's a leg aside and looking at, what are the characteristics of the frog leg and what is it made of? And it has a tendon. Okay, well, why? Why does it have a tendon? What does that do? So it's storing and releasing energy. Okay, well, we have these things in engineering that store and release energy, like springs or capacitors or rubber bands. Somebody was thinking about trampolines at some point. It was like, yes, okay, now how do you use that to help solve your problem? And then now their designs were getting more interesting, more creative, and more inspired. And that was so fulfilling as an educator. Like, yes, I got you there. I did my job.
Well, and I think that feeds in a little bit to your consulting practice as well, because I think this example really kind of shows that progression and the criticality of having that feedback so that, you're really being pushed as a student to develop that deep understanding, which is what
Mm-hmm.
ultimately leads to the better solutions.
Absolutely.
So, Jacquelyn, how has the role that curiosity plays in your career changed for you over time? Personally, I've found that my mental bandwidth changes based on the job that I'm in, or family demands, or the occasional global pandemic. Has that been the case for you?
Yes, I have found that curiosity has changed for me over time. So initially, as I explained earlier, when you were asking about just how I got into engineering, so initially curiosity for me was very much about finding information, answering questions. I have this need to know, and I want to learn more. I want to amass knowledge on something, answer a question. But as I've changed, my roles have changed. Um, I've taken on leadership positions. I've done leadership trainings, I've realized that curiosity now has helped me to better understand myself, like the emotions that I'm feeling and how these emotions are affecting me. Um, but also to help me understand other people. So when I give them feedback, how is it making them feel? Or just having a conversation with someone and like picking up on their different cues and asking them, like showing that empathy to others to really help work with people on a broad basis. So I'd say like initially it was very much, knowledge finding, answering questions, and then over time it's changed for me to better understand like how people work and how I can better be a better leader.
Well,
Yeah.
especially in the role that you're in now, like, you're a professor, you have students, you really moved from kind of an individual contributor into being a force multiplier. And I really love the idea of applying your curiosity to make sure that you are an effective teacher and an effective leader in these situations. So, since the role that curiosity plays for you has evolved over time, are there practices or things that you can share with our listeners that you use to stay curious or that they can use to stay curious?
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't say that I have a specific practice, but there are definitely things in my life that help me to stay curious. I would say one of them is my research area, bio-inspired design. So because of that close connection and learn to nature and learning about biology, it's really easy for me to just go outside and observe nature, pay attention to what's going on around me. And um, I think this is something that anybody can do. I mean, even if you're stuck inside, right, you can stare out a window and just look at nature outside and just kind of quiet everything around you and just, look, what I talked about before about observing, like honing in that skill of observation, notice things that maybe you didn't notice before. And there's a bonus to that, right? Being outside in nature is just a thing that can improve our wellness. There's a lot of studies on that, which is also really nice. So if
Mm.
you have an opportunity to go outside and put your feet in the grass, definitely do that. But yeah, like listen to what's going on around you outside. Go outside at different times of day. Um, there, there's so many things happening in nature that you can observe. So that's definitely one thing that keeps me curious because I'm always thinking like, oh, how does nature do this? Or what can I use this? What can I learn from this? Or use this to solve a problem? Um, Something else that helps me stay curious is listening to podcasts, kind of like this one, or reading books that are totally unrelated to anything that I do. And this could be through like a book club where somebody else is picking the book because they would probably pick something that you're not going to pick, um, or getting recommendations from friends. But yeah, some of the leadership circles that I'm a part of, we do this. We read different books and talk about them. So definitely book club approach can help with reading and learning about things that are different that you wouldn't otherwise probably pick on your own. And then, it helps build your repertoire of knowledge. And then you can, again, like make those connections and revise your mental models and keep learning. And you never know what it's going to like lead to next. And then the other thing that really helps me stay curious is that I have two small kids. One's 5, one's 7, and they ask tons of questions. And as someone who is a naturally curious person and just likes to ask questions myself and answer them, we go down the rabbit hole all the time. And it was actually like just the other day, my kids were asking about lightning and we were talking about it. And Then I was saying something about Van de Graaff generators and Faraday cages, and like, what's that, Mom? And I was like, okay, well, let me tell you about it, right? I love to talk about these things, and the role that voltage and current play, and these events and things like that. Because one time, actually, so true story, we were doing some coloring one evening next to a set of windows in our sunroom, and in the neighbor's yard, a lightning struck the tree and it just exploded.
Whoa.
Yeah, we actually got to witness an exploding tree, and it was very loud. And then the kids were like, "What just happened?" And they're freaking out. But then we talked about it. It's like, well, why did the tree not burn? Right? It got hit by lightning, and why did it burst apart into so many small pieces? And so we were talking about, well, it has moisture inside, and then the electricity caused that moisture to heat up rapidly, and then it started to just burst apart because then the heat builds pressure, and sort of like a piece of popcorn, essentially what happened to that tree. It just popped open, and it was a really interesting learning experience. So my kids they know that if they start asking Mom questions, I will just start telling them what I know. And if I don't know, well, then we pull out the device. My kids are funny. They're like, Mom, ask Siri. So sometimes I do. But if I know the answer, I'll tell them first. And then we may or may not find a video about it, because they're such visual learners. They love videos, and I have to say I kind of like videos too, especially when like it shows, like, breaks stuff down and explains things. So it's definitely been fun having them ask questions, as long as we have the time. If they start asking questions and we don't have time, then my response is a bit different. But yeah, I do have to kind of keep myself in check, because if they ask something at bedtime, I'm like, oh, I really want to answer this question for you, but we really need to get some sleep also. So having them ask questions, we talk about all kinds of things, and yeah, um, I try to cultivate their own curiosity. I want them to keep this and not feel like they need to hold their questions back. So we just go down the rabbit hole. So that's definitely an easy way to stay curious, to have small kids around.
As a callback to one of our very first episodes of this podcast, that was around mentorship and kind of the idea that mentors can be really anywhere. So, is it weird to say that you can be mentored in curiosity by your own kids sometimes?
Ooh, I like this question. That's I think yes, because there's so many different models of mentoring. I'm actually involved in a project right now. It's called omnidirectional mentoring, excuse me, and it's this notion of, we're all people, we all know things. Why can't we share it with anybody in any hierarchy, level, direction? And so, yeah, I agree with that. I think you can. I think we can learn stuff from the younger people, just like they can learn from us.
And on that, I think that that is a perfect place to end this conversation. So, Jacquelyn, are there any last pearls of wisdom or anything that you hope our listeners are going to take from this conversation?
Ooh, back to my kids. Okay, my kids sometimes ask about their growth rates, and like, how big am I going to be? And I tell my kids that your bones will grow. Like, at some point, your bones will stop growing, but your brain should never stop growing. You should be learning new things every day.
That's beautiful. I just got chills. I love that. Jacquelyn, thank you so much for joining us. If you would like to learn more about bio-inspired design or consulting opportunities with Jacquelyn, you can find more information on her website, jacquelynnagel.com. We've got that linked in the show notes. Please remember to subscribe to this podcast, visit us on YouTube, and connect with us at hkn.org. Jacquelyn, thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciated this conversation.
It was our pleasure to have you. And listeners, we'll see you next time.